we cannot afford to see ourselves as powerless. Because when we see ourselves as powerless, what happens is we actually abdicate our responsibility and we end up pushing all of those challenges, pushing our stress downstream onto the people who are poured into us, onto the teams that we're working with, onto basically anybody with less power than us. And let me tell you, people out there, they are struggling. A couple months ago, my company did a little study on managers and design, and we looked at that pretty broadly. So we looked at people who are line managers in UX, product design, research, and content roles. We heard from 132 people, and what we heard was that half of them are struggling mentally at work right now. They rated themselves a 1 or a 2 on a 5-point scale, where 1 was, I'm struggling a lot. Less than a quarter said they were doing well. And 3 out of 5 said that their mental state at work is worse than it was 2 years ago. So they talked about what led to those feelings, what their challenges were. And one of the most common answers that they gave was that they were feeling squeezed between pressures from above and trying to protect their teams. They said things like they're trying to be a buffer between the mayhem of demanding and fickle leadership and the good intentions of my directs doing the work. And so maybe it's not a surprise that a lot of design managers are not exactly thrilled at the state of their field right now. Half of our respondents in this study were feeling downright negative about it. Only about 1 in 6 was feeling positively. And more than 3 out of 4 said they were feeling worse about their field than they did 2 years ago. Many people in this study described their professional field in stunningly negative terms. They said it was in peril. They said it was a shit show. They said it was circling the drain. The sentiment we heard often was things like, we're in turmoil. Businesses don't know if they want or even need us. Designers feel rejected and abused. Nobody's sure about what to do to get or keep a job. I've never seen it this bad. And remember, the people we included in the study, they were managers. They were people who have ICs reporting into them. They're the people who are meaning to keep work on track, to keep their teams motivated, to help people grow. And if this group is struggling this much, how effective can they be at that job? So you might be hearing some of these quotes from this research and nodding along and thinking like, yeah, those people are right. Like, I'm afraid too. But here's the thing. When we let our fear lead, when we let our fear run the show, when we operate from that fear, what we end up doing is we end up painting ourselves into a really small and miserable corner as leaders. Because when fear runs the show, we end up being very self-protective and we latch onto reactive patterns. One in particular I want to share with you all is something called the drama triangle. So the drama triangle is a model that was developed by Stephen B. Cartman, who's a psychiatrist, in 1968. And he describes the roles that people commonly play in conflict. And when they fall into these roles, how that tends to keep people in conflict. So when we are the victim, we feel powerless against the big bad villain around us. Maybe that's our organization and its profit-seeking objectives. Maybe it's our executives who are just telling us to do more with less again. And when we do that, when we start getting into that victim role, we focus so much on the sort of poor me of it. What we end up doing is eliding our own responsibility, eliding any power that we have. Or maybe we fall into playing the hero. And I see this a lot with managers and leaders in design and in research, where we see it as our job to save our teams, to fix things for them, to be the shit umbrella, to protect our teams from toxicity. And when we do that, what ends up happening is that we become these miserable martyrs. And it's this reactive way that we tend to want to regain a sense of power, right? So if we just fix everything, if we handle everything, if we carry everything for everyone, then we feel important and then we feel necessary. But at tremendous cost, at a cost to ourselves and the people around us, because we own too much, more than is sustainable, and we don't let anybody else grow. And then the other role that we can fall into is playing the villain. That is when we lead our people with our fear and we become rigid and demanding as a result. We become more authoritarian. And I think this is particularly compelling for leaders in moments where they feel powerless, because it is a way to get a sense of control. If you behave in an authoritarian way, congratulations, you have regained a sense of control in your life. It's just not a healthy one. And it's a sense of control that comes at the expense of the people around you. And so here's the thing. When you play into the drama triangle, when you take all of your feelings of fear and stress and anxiety about the state of the world, which are all valid, when you take those and you allow yourself to fall into these roles, your team is going to fall into them too. If you act out your unmet need for control on your designers and you are playing that villain, guess what? They're very likely to feel like victims. And you know what's very likely to happen then? Somebody else around them is going to go try and rescue them. There'll be some line manager somewhere overburdening themselves, overprotecting their team because they want to be that hero. So we need to break this cycle. Our teams need us to break this cycle. So how do we do that? Well, it might be counterintuitive, but one of the things I found as a coach is that the best place to start breaking this cycle is actually not by thinking about our work as leaders. It's by taking a really big step back. It's getting kind of way outside of the job space and really looking at our identity. Because one of the things that I've noticed over the last few years is that people in UX oftentimes have their identities really firmly tethered to their jobs and to their titles. Like that story I told at the beginning, where UX wasn't just a career for that leader, it was everything for her. And I think at some level that makes sense. A lot of us joined this field because we wanted to do good, because we really care about making the world more accessible and more usable, making products more useful. We care about the people who are actually interacting with all this tech, and we want it to feel like we have a space to express our values in the world. I know that brought a lot of people into research. And all of that is lovely, but if we're being honest with ourselves, one of the things I think we also find is that we can kind of end up turning that inside out and then over rely on UX to affirm that we are good. What I mean by that is that we aren't just using UX work to live our values, but using it to affirm our value as human beings, to give us evidence that we are righteous, to help us believe we're good people. And when that happens, what we end up doing is we become increasingly attached to our work as our identity because it feels like our proof. It's our evidence of our goodness. And so we cling to that evidence that we're good. A few months ago, Lyft's head of content design, Alicia Ostarello, she wrote this beautiful essay about her own experience with this, with over-identifying with her work and how it broke her, both mentally and physically. It left her unable to get out of bed. She said she was sleeping for 22 hours straight, subsisting on a diet of fig Newtons and shame. And finally, after a leave of absence, she realized something. She realized my self-worth was handcuffed to my title so completely that not actively working felt like a death of self. A death of self. She describes realizing that there was an insatiable monster in her who sought approval and validation through her work. A monster that wanted her job to love her back, was willing to do anything it took to get this love. Except a company can't love you, no matter how hard you work, no matter how hard you try. And the more that we look to our work to validate our worth as human beings, to give us a sense of identity, the more susceptible we are to participating in the drama triangle. Because when you see your work as who you are, and work's not going well, your world does crumble. It's destabilizing. And in those moments that are destabilizing, what our brains want to do more than anything is to create stability again, to get that safety back. Playing into the drama triangle is a really quick way to do that. When we play into the drama triangle, things make sense again. I don't have to change anything about how I work. I don't have to set boundaries. I don't have to shift my relationship to my work. I don't have to find like a deeper and more enduring sense of self. All I have to do is put myself into that victim role, and then I abdicate responsibility. I don't have to change. It's not my fault. It's somebody else's fault. Or I can put myself into that villain role, and I can say, well, these people are to blame. If these designers would stop being so precious, if these researchers would just learn about business, if everybody would just buck up and stop being a baby, then we'd be fine as a field. Or maybe I throw myself into being the hero. Maybe I go in and I say, I'm going to save my team. I'm going to protect my poor, helpless designers from leadership's decisions. I'm going to fix things for people. I'm going to keep things from them. And I'll hold that burden all by myself. In all of these cases, I don't have to change anything. I've boxed myself in and I've told myself that basically I have no options and I can just stay stuck. This is miserable. Nobody likes it, but it's also comfortable because it doesn't require anything hard of you. It just requires you to continue playing out the same pattern over and over and over again. There is another option though. There is kind of an inverse of the drama triangle that I found really valuable to think about. It's called the empowerment dynamic, and it came from David Emerald. And so it depicts the roles that we can choose to step into instead of playing a part in the drama triangle. So when we choose to be a creator instead of a victim, what that means is that we're saying, okay, something unfair or painful might be happening, right? Like we don't have to pretend that everything is rosy, but then we're adding something in. How will I respond? What will I do next? What am I choosing in service of the outcomes that I'm seeking in my life? And I want to be clear here. I'm not suggesting this from a place of toxic positivity. It's not about pretending that you're happy with how the status quo is in your organization right now. It's not about pretending that you don't feel hurt or angry at things like layoffs or if research isn't being taken seriously. It's not about kind of like putting a silver lining on everything. It is only about coming to a place where you're willing to say, I couldn't control this situation, but what power do I have? What are my choices? What will I do next? Now, that brings me to the coach, because getting into that creator space, that mindset, that can take some work. And coaching, I think coaching is one of the most underused leadership skills, which I, of course, would say because I am a coach. But when you choose to play into that coach role instead of the hero role, you can help people go from victim to creator. Because what you're doing when you're playing a coach and not a hero is that you're not there to rescue people. You're instead choosing to support people who are struggling in a way that does not take custody of their problems. It's about asking questions that help people reconnect with their sense of power, their resourcefulness, their agency. You're giving people an opportunity to think about what they are going to do instead of just handling it for them. And then the other role you can embody is the role of the challenger instead of the villain. And so, like I said before, right now, leaders who are feeling frustrated at how teams are showing up, leaders who are feeling upset that their people aren't speaking up loudly enough, being proactive enough, whatever it is, they can so easily end up taking on this role of the villain, where you can get into this place where it's like, well, no one gets it, and these teams are immature, and if they just did XYZ, then they'd have that seat. And it can be really callous and minimizing. And so in contrast, if you take on that challenger role, what you're really saying is, okay, let's be real and honest with one another about what the challenge is. We're not going to pretend that like doing more with less is a real thing actual humans can do. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, reality is hard right now. I want to challenge you to use this as a moment to grow instead of shut down. I want to challenge you to rise to this particular occasion. Now, I want to be really clear when we talk about shifting from that drama triangle to the empowerment dynamic. It's not about saying that the version in the drama triangle is fake. It's actually also one way to look at the situation, and it's a valid way to look at the situation. You might feel legitimately victimized by your organization. You might feel legitimately called to jump in and help people and fix things for them. But the purpose of moving into this empowerment dynamic is really just to break out of that default thinking that tends to leave all of us stuck feeling hopeless or overburdened or mistrustful and controlling, and to instead choose to operate from a lens of choice. Because ultimately, I think of choice as power. And the thing is, the stronger your identity is outside of work, like the clearer you are in who you are, the easier it is to choose the empowerment dynamic instead of the drama triangle. Because when we are confident in our worth, we don't need our work to validate us. We don't need it to make us feel liked and wanted. And that makes it a hell of a lot easier to claim our power and do what all of those managers in our research who are struggling really need from their leaders. They need us to have hard conversations with our leadership, even when it makes us less likable. They need us to set real priorities that the team can actually achieve and stick to them, even if that means we got to disappoint somebody. And it means being honest with ourselves and with our team about what our company cares about right now, what it's optimizing for, even if it doesn't feel good to admit it. because you know in your core that you are valid and valuable in a way that your company does not control, in a way that your executives' whims can't take away, in a way that the market can never dictate. And that is our real power. And it's the power that I hope all of us choose to embrace. So thank you for listening. If you're curious about that research, you can get it on our website. The URL is there in the slides. I'll throw it in the chat as well. Thank you.